These are just a few preliminary considerations so you know what the course is going to be like, what it's going to try to accomplish, and just some basic mechanics. First of all, the syllabus is on the Moodle page. Read the syllabus. I know every instructor tells you that, or very likely every instructor tells you that. Definitely read the syllabus. Most of the questions I receive from confused and sometimes panicky students about what's expected of them, those questions would be answered right away if the student looked at the syllabus. So I'm just telling you, for your own peace of mind, know what's in the syllabus. There's also a document linked from the Moodle page called Essay Guidelines. Again, if you want to know what the essays have to be like, how long, what format, and so forth, I'm very, very flexible about that, but what you do need to know, including what I will be looking for to grade your essay, will be in the Essay Guidelines, again, linked from the main Moodle page. Okay. Books. There are 2 books required. This one will be our main text, Living Religions by Mary Pat Fisher, Eastern Traditions. She has a Western Traditions as well, and she also has a combined one. This is a little pricier than most of the books I order for my classes, but it's a reasonable price compared with other textbooks. She does a very good job, and she covers the material we need to cover. The second book is The World's Wisdom by Philip Novak. This is a set of translations of original sources so that you get a chance to actually read passages from the Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, the Tao Te Ching, and so forth, the scriptures that are important documents for the traditions we're looking at. Philip Novak wrote this book to accompany a classic text that I used to use, Houston Smith's The World's Religions. He will occasionally say this goes with this or that chapter in Houston Smith. Just don't worry about that. That's not something you need. I have a fond spot for Houston Smith. He was the professor of one of my favorite professors, and he virtually, well, for all intent and purposes, invented the field of comparative religion, mid-20th century. Smith, however, doesn't do an equally good job with every chapter, and because we're doing this online, I don't have the chance to give you a bunch of copied material and say, don't bother to read this chapter in Smith. So I just got rid of it altogether, replaced it with Mary Pat Fisher's book, which is a very good book. I will be dividing up the course into the various traditions we're going to look at, and I'll make specific assignments from each of the books, usually both of the books in conjunction, when we're studying a particular topic. I believe you can rent the Mary Pat Fisher book, but you should double check that if you want to do that. The Novak book, well, probably you can get that for under $10 on Amazon or at the bookstore. Okay. Check your email daily. That will be my main method of announcing things to the class or keeping in touch with you or returning grades and comments on your work. You do need to check your email daily when you're taking an online course. Communicate with me. If at any time you're at sea, you don't know what's going on, or you're having some difficulty, or you need more time, you have a personal situation, you're having difficulty keeping up at a particular point in the course, let me know. Please do communicate with me, and email is the preferred way to do that. I do have an office here. I'm almost never in it, and so if you call my office, you're very unlikely to get a hold of me, okay? But email I do check every day, including from home. This course is called Eastern Religions, but it's a course offered through the philosophy department. I do want to say a few words about that. The term religion was created in the West to describe certain Western institutions. When you look at non-Western cultures, sometimes phenomena in those cultures don't neatly fit into the categories we have. Well, is this a philosophy? Is this a religion? Is this something else? Sometimes the answer is, you know what, none of those categories which neatly fit the Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, neatly fit onto Eastern traditions. One of the best examples of that is Buddhism. Is Buddhism a philosophy, a religion, a sort of psychology or whatever? Well, it's all those things, and it's not exactly any one of those things based on a Western model. Most of us in the West would be expecting a religion to be focused on some kind of deity, because the religions that predominate in the West are deity-focused. There is a God. For Buddhism, there is no God. Okay? Confucianism, there is no God. Okay? Taoism, there is no God. Okay? These are three of the major traditions of the East. Now, in saying there is no God, we'll find that that requires interpretation, but there's no straightforward God in the way that Christianity or Judaism or Islam are focused on a deity. Okay? So, philosophy, well, what is philosophy? Philosophy is an attempt to clarify our most basic assumptions, our most basic beliefs, our most basic values, and hold them up to scrutiny to ask, are these beliefs justified? Are there better alternatives? Are they in some way problematic? What are their consequences? And so forth and so forth. Okay? Now, definitely, many of the traditions we look at attempt to do exactly that. And in approaching these traditions, we will do exactly that. Okay? Another approach that I emphasize, in the West, it's called phenomenology. What is phenomenology? It's an attempt to look at consciousness from a first-person perspective. Okay, for our purposes, phenomenology of religion, probably the best way, most helpful way to think about this is we want to, at some point, not be thinking about, say, Hinduism. We want to ask, what does it mean to be a Hindu? What does it mean to a Hindu to be a Hindu? To experience the world as a Hindu, and to try to understand that. Okay? There are those who would argue that you frankly cannot understand any religious tradition without asking that question and without getting a good grasp on that. One of my professors used to say, if you don't understand the tradition well enough that you could understand why someone might convert to it, then you don't understand that tradition. There was an ancient thinker, I've tried to run down this quotation because it's so good. I've not been able to find the original source. But there's an ancient thinker who said, any religion viewed from the outside is indistinguishable from insanity. Okay? Yeah, but if you're inside that tradition, you understand what it's about and what the various rituals mean and what the various ideas and images and so forth mean, then it can seem to make profound sense, whereas someone who doesn't understand it, how are they possibly going to distinguish it from someone just acting weird, having strange beliefs? Okay? So, there's another reason for trying that phenomenological approach. Okay, empathy and respect. Confucius emphasized empathy and respect and said that without empathy and respect, civilization's not possible. Empathy, you have to try to understand that others have feelings, that others have an emotional life, others are subject to pleasure and pain and have their own preferences, and then you have to respect that. If you have those two things, you can have a civilization. To the degree that you don't have those two things, relations between people and relations within institutions will break down to the point that civilization becomes eventually impossible. Well, okay, we're going to approach these various traditions, hopefully, with empathy and respect. In other words, we're not starting off with the idea of, well, let's pick holes in this. Let's try to ridicule this. I mean, what's the purpose of that, except, you walk away feeling like you're smarter than they are, which you probably aren't. I certainly know I'm not, okay? But empathy and respect does not mean that we will simply give up our critical faculties. Frank, honest, critical reasoning, we also have to bring that to the table. Within any of the traditions we look at, there are internal controversies, there are external critics, and without a frank appraisal of those perspectives, we can't really understand the traditions. Okay? I know there are sometimes Western students believing that it's just wrong to ever say anything critical about someone's religion. None of the traditions we're looking at believe that. Okay? Actually, none of the Western traditions believe that either. Okay? A poet a woman named, whose last name is Nehru, but I don't think she's actually any relationship to the first president of India, who was also Nehru. She once said, it's good to have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out. Okay, and I think that's actually a good rule for life. Be open-minded, but don't be foolish. Okay? We're going to study the traditions, the main traditions of India, Tibet, China, and Japan. Okay, that's extremely ambitious. We could take any one of those and spend the entire time on just that culture. Now, because we're going to cover that territory, we will not be able to look at every tradition that exists within those cultures. For India, we're going to concentrate on Hinduism and then on early Buddhism, to some extent on Tantra. When we get to Tibet, we'll be talking about the Pern tradition, the indigenous magical animistic tradition. We'll discuss what that means later, along with the migration of Buddhism to Tibet and migration of Tantra, which is both Hindu and Buddhist, to Tibet. China, we'll talk about the I Ching, a classic which is very important because both Confucius and the Taoists believe that they are simply interpreting and applying the I Ching. Okay? And we will also look at Chinese Buddhism because Buddhism undergoes quite a metamorphosis when it comes into contact with particularly with Taoism. Okay, when we get to Japan, we'll look at the Shinto tradition, which is the only indigenous major religion from Japan. But we'll also look at Japanese Buddhism and again ask, how did the contact with Japanese culture modify Buddhism? Buddhism has always been very, very adaptable. Hinduism is largely limited to India, although there are pockets of Hinduism all around the world, including increasingly in the West. Tibet is only a very small slice of the Buddhist tradition, but it is of so much interest to people in our culture that I think it's justified to spend time talking about Tibet. China, of course, is China. That's a big chunk of the world's population. And, of course, I don't have to argue for the importance of Japanese culture. But we'll look at Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and also, to a lesser extent, Shinto. We won't be looking at the Sikh religion in India because simply there are fewer Sikhs. It's not as historically influential, although this is by no means to in any way disparage the Sikh tradition, which is worth studying, or the Jain tradition, again, which is worth studying. We won't be looking at all at Islam, although Islam did play an important role, particularly in northern Indian history. The reason for that is Islam is not an Eastern religion. Okay, Islam is a Western religion. Moses, Abraham, Jesus, those are all figures in the Quran. Many of the scriptures are in common between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The teachings are very, very similar in many ways. Muhammad himself, in his Charter of Medina, how it is that Muslims are supposed to live, said, it's not necessarily haram or corrupt or evil to not be a Muslim. For instance, Christians and Jews have the same morality that we do. They worship the God of Abraham just as we do. They revere Moses and Jesus just as we do. We do have some theological differences with them, but there's no reason why we can't live together peacefully and in harmony because, after all, at the core, our spirituality is very, very similar. In fact, in medieval Europe, Jews used to flee from Christian countries to take refuge in Islamic countries where, during the golden age of Islam, they were honored as the people of the book. Okay, well, I hope I've made the case that Islam is more properly studied in the context of studying Western religions than in the context of studying Eastern religions. Okay, and that's why we don't look at it, and that's by no means meaning any disrespect toward Islam. So, we are going to be thinking a great deal in this course about wisdom. In fact, every tradition that we look at, we're going to ask, how does this tradition define wisdom? How does it say that wisdom is attained? What are the barriers to wisdom? And what are the benefits of attaining wisdom? By approaching these as wisdom traditions, and I mentioned Houston Smith, I do owe that thought to him. Let's not approach these as religions, but as wisdom traditions. By approaching these as wisdom traditions, we can find, amid all this diversity, unifying factors that will stay with us as we go through, go all the way from India through Japan. Okay, Well, thank you for taking this voyage with me, taking this journey with me, and I hope that, that we both, at the end of the semester, say that was very, very worth doing, and I feel my life has been enriched by doing it. It's not uncommon for me to receive emails from students who took this course years ago who say, you know, I just wanted to tell you how much that course has stayed with me and how much I gained from it. So I hope your experience is positive as well. Thanks.